Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we're here for LCS week number 5, my overview and analysis video. Do appreciate you guys being patient on this one. I know this is out like a day and a half late, and that's not ideal. It's certainly not the circumstance I wanted to have this week, but just got a little busy, and so didn't have time to make this video on the Thursday. It's coming out on the Friday, so unfortunately, some games in week number 6 have already happened as this video is being filmed, but rest assured, I have not seen any of them. I have tried to take precautions to make sure not only that I'm not seeing the games, but I wouldn't have had time. I had to watch last week's games anyways. So I am going to be going over all of the week 5 action in today's video. If you guys are excited, let me know down in the comments section below what teams are interesting to you, what teams aren't. There really is a lot of shakeup, a lot of interesting things to talk about when it comes to the LCS right now in 2024. And I do think that, you know, there are some teams that are rising and falling in terms of my perception. Would love to know you guys' thoughts on everything, of course, as well down in the comment section below. If you want to know my thoughts on everything that's happened in the LCS so far, you can check out the playlist linked up in the iCard right now. That's going to have every single LCS weekly recap that we have done so far this year in there. And so if you want my thoughts on how we got to this point, that's definitely a good place to start. But without further ado, let's jump right into the analysis. Of course, if you are new here, what we're going to do is go game by game, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the game and a dud of the game for each individual game. And then at the end of the video, we will be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week to kind of tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. Of course, we will also be updating my personal power rankings from number 1 to number 8 in the LCS to kind of give you an idea of maybe where I think these teams are, you know, falling in terms of strength at the current moment. There are definitely going to be some changes because week 5 was very, very intriguing. So without further ado, let's jump right into the analysis of the action itself. And we get to start, of course, with day number 1 of this regular week, coming back from a gigantic break here in the LCS, and why not have the 2 bottom teams in my power rankings face off as the return series? It was Immortals taking on Shopify Rebellion. Neither of these teams able to find their footing yet, and Shopify is actually going to pick up a really nice win for themselves here. They have 3 wins on the split so far. Those 3 wins have been FlyQuest, they have been Energy, and they have been Cloud9. So really not a bad resume for Shopify, but they have been losing to a lot of the other bottom teams, and so it's kind of hard to get a read on them, but they do come out here and beat Immortals. This is exactly what you want to see from a Shopify team that really does want to make top 6, that I think expected to make top 6 coming into the year. Things have not necessarily worked out, but maybe they're moving in the right direction. Immortals is not good. It's really unfortunate, but you know, they have some interesting pieces. I think even as, you know, one of, if not the worst team in the LCS, there still are interesting pieces to talk about on this team, but there's just simply too much inconsistency from game to game for them to ever actually be a major threat. But let's go ahead and talk about Shopify. First player of the game for me is going to go to Insanity in the mid lane. I've been asking for this. Insanity, I think, has really kind of gotten away from his style in recent weeks. I think that, you know, obviously he is definitely somebody who's not afraid to go outside of the box for mid lane picks. We know the Scion, we know the Graves, we know the Renekton. You know, we know those things that he plays in the mid lane that, you know, give this team a little bit of that extra spice, but he's also been really good at mages his entire career, and it felt like this team was moving away from that to try and basically exclusively play some of these weird picks in the mid lane. It feels they are moving back to more traditional, conventional mid lane picks, and the Hui here was really strong for Shopify. Insanity was really important in this game. This champion has so many tools, so many options, and so when you put him on a player that does have confidence, that can play super fast and super aggressive like Insanity was able to do here, it's a really big positive, and I think Insanity did a great job. B-Boy continues to look amazing. I think that this guy is criminally underrated at the LCS level. I know that his team has not been particularly good, but he has been one of the best AD carries in the LCS, in my opinion, especially since taking that starting spot from Wild Turtle. Really happy to see him continue to look good on the Senna. You have Zeyzal have a really good game in this one on the Nautilus. He's been a bit more hit or miss over the course of this split. Really hasn't had the awful games. I'm not going to try and sit here and say that he has been running it really at all this split, but he really hasn't had takeover performances either. He hasn't exactly been the best mid-game fighter, which you kind of need out of a support right now in terms of how the current meta is going. Fake God and Boogie were fine. Boogie in particular on the Ivern, and Fake God didn't really have to do anything. Castle was actually better in lane, but Fake God's not exactly been a huge strength for this team so far this year, but it's nice to see Insanity getting back to some of those those roots. He has not really been that good this year. He's actually been a bit of a negative, I would say, for Shopify overall. It's nice to see him start to pick up, at least some of the momentum that he was able to generate so much of in 2023 when I was so high on him, especially with this bot lane playing well. But for Immortals on the other side of this matchup, they're just not good. There's really not a whole ton I can say about it. Dud of the game is going to go to Armeo. Very deserved in this one, just really bad pathing, not great macro awareness, not a very good game from Armeo, but these happen every so often. I see a lot of people constantly criticizing Armeo on Reddit, and while he's not exactly been perfect this split, he's had a lot of games that I think are very lackluster. He's also been one of the few players on this team to actually have good games every once in a while, to win games for Immortals. He's just a little bit more hit or miss. He's not exactly going to be the most stable jungler in the entire world. I still think he's talented. I just don't think the talent around him really necessarily pushes him forward, and I think he's starting to make some pretty clear errors. I'm not trying to, absolve him of blame, but I don't think this was, this is not indicative of him as a whole, as I think Reddit would like to lead you to believe. They like to defend Castle a lot as well. I love Castle. Trust me, I think he's a really fun player to watch, and he's definitely the best player on this Immortals team. That I will not even remotely try to argue, but this wasn't a great game from Castle outside of lane. It felt like his team fighting was really, really useless, and maybe that's the fact that they were down so much gold, but when you're a Gnar and you've got the ability to actually play some of these fights out, you simply have to be better than what Castle was. Ole was really poor on the Maokai. Tactical couldn't really do anything on Smolder. Same thing for Mask. On the Azir, this Immortals team just isn't actually all that good. And it means that when they're not able to generate leads or advantages in individual lanes, when Armeo doesn't have any pressure, or when, you have a player who's losing as much of it on the map as he was in this game, they're just not going to be able to recover from that. It's a little bit too debilitating, but nice win for Shopify. Again, really like that Insanity and B-Boy and Zazel are playing well. Those are the players that you really want to see pop off. Obviously, Boogie's had a couple of good games throughout this split as well, but Insanity and B-Boy, especially as a carry duo, could actually be pretty dangerous to deal with. The top 5 teams are, pretty locked in my opinion, but bottom 3 is still, open. You can still get that number 6 seed. It's certainly within the realm of possibilities for Shopify if they can continue to get a bit more consistent, and if they play like they did in this game, where they're able to take advantage of a lot of the mistakes the enemy is making, as well as, push the tempo themselves, not be willing to, or scared to make plays. I think this team could end up reaching that. They're at 4-6 now, and, I think it's going to be a pretty interesting last couple of weeks for them. And then moving on to our second game of day number 1, and it's a top of the table clash, or at least you would think it would be, especially considering the rosters of these two teams. FlyQuest taking on Cloud9, and Cloud9 pick up a super much needed victory in this one. Wow, finally, this team feels like they are starting to play up to their potential. It was nice to see them come out of this break, out of this, 2-week pause essentially from the league, and be able to pick up a win. I know there's obviously a lot of memes around this team right now because they are a super team in terms of roster construction, and they're 4-5 coming into the last 2 weeks of the season, but this is a big win against the number 1 team in the league for them. For FlyQuest, obviously you would have loved to have come out here and won this, but if Cloud9 is going to get some of their mojo back, this isn't the worst loss in the entire world. On paper, Cloud9 should be beating a team like you, and so just because it hasn't exactly happened up until this point this season doesn't mean that this is, a catastrophic loss. Obviously you would have loved to have won this, gone 8-2, and really cemented yourself as the number 1 team in North America, but a loss is a loss, and if you're going to have it, this is a pretty good way to have it, at least against a team like Cloud9. So let's talk about it. Player of the game is going to go to Jojo Pune in the mid lane. He's been awesome all split long. You can say what you want about the other 4 members of this roster so far, Fudge, Blabber, Berserker, Vulcan, who have all at some point really underperformed the expectations that we had for them going into the year, but Jojo has just not been a part of that same group. He has been phenomenal the entire year. He's had maybe one bad game across, their 9 that they played before the break, and he comes back here and he picks up some LCK tech, some Showmaker tech here with Tank Azir. I was ready for this. I don't think FlyQuest was ready for this. They didn't have any sort of answer. They continuously dove the Azir as if he was going to be vulnerable. The casters weren't ready for this. They clearly did not watch the games in the LCK that this was being piloted in, or in the LPL. We have seen Tank Azir in a lot of the other regions while we were on break during this patch. It's something that has really picked up a lot of steam, and I think think JoJo really played it at a super high level, which is why he's getting player of the game for me. I think Broadcast gave it to Blabber. I can also understand that. I think Nidalee was also very valuable in this one, created a lot of chances and opportunities for C9. I think generally the Prio and Void Grubs this game was very positive, and it allowed C9 to play a lot more aggressive when it came to trying to dive and play for kills in lane, and I think that just enables the style that this team wants to play for. It's not necessarily that they can't play other things, but they want to be able to outskill you. They want to be able to use the mechanical advantage that they have over US players in order to generate their own advantages. It's something Berserker and Vulcan have really not done in the 2v2 all year, but Blabber was really good, JoJo was really good, and that was the recipe for success in weeks 1 and 2 when this team was really rolling at the beginning of the year. Was Blabber winning early, being able to translate that gold into JoJo and allowing him to carry your late game team fights. That is, in my opinion, clearly going to be how this team is going to win games. But everybody else was fine too. Vulcan was much better in this game on the Nautilus than he has been. He's had a couple of rough, I would say games. I think it's nice to see him on something that he is very comfortable on. Nautilus, a champion that he's played a lot of over the course of his career, have such a good game. Berserker was fine in this one. Fudge was fine in this one, being able to play off the Nidalee with the Renekton. We're going to see a lot of Renekton this week. He's definitely back, and Cloud9, I think, really piloted it. Well, I think Fudge is a good Renekton player, but this, once again, is about jungle mid for me. They are the stars of this Cloud9 team. Every single time this team has looked as good as we would have expected, it's because these two in particular are popping off. I think a lot of expectation is now going to be on them, specifically on JoJo. He's going to need to be able to match it for the rest of the year. And then for Fly on the other side, you would have hoped, again, that you could pick up a win here, go to 8-2, really become that #1 North American team, but it just wasn't meant to happen coming out of the break. You could give done of the game to basically anybody with the exception, I would say, of Masu and Inspired, who I think both were relatively fine. They didn't make any sort of major errors in this game, but Busio had a couple of really bad arrows on Ashe, generally wasn't particularly useful in the laning phase, which is a problem for this bot lane, which is just supposed to become such a nuisance in the early game that it makes it very difficult for the enemy to play. I think you could give this to Bwipo for just not really respecting the enemy team consistently, trying to make Aatrox plays and just dying super early in fights. But I'm going to give it to Jensen, because when you lose this hard in lane as Karma and you're continuously trying to make plays on this Azir, you're wasting time. And I think that's just kind of what happened in this game, as Fly wasted a lot of their mid-game time, allowed this to spiral out, and by the time we hit 20 minutes, Cloud9 had such full control of the game that there was nothing that they could do. Jensen just wasn't going to be useful the rest of that game. But again, if you want to give to Bwipo or Busio, I think both are relatively fine in this case. I think this is more of a team loss for FlyQuest. I've seen some people criticizing the draft. I actually don't think this draft is all that bad. I think Varus is a hyper carry right now in a certain sense, where you can put a lot of, responsibility on him to be your primary damage dealer, and he can come through in that. That champion is still in an incredibly strong place, especially with an Ashe in the support position, and you've got the Karma to be able to enable that. You've got an Aatrox to be that secondary carry from the top side on your, MVP caliber player, and Bwipo, who, he's played like that throughout this year. There are options. I don't think the draft was the problem. I think they just really made the least of their plays. They picked bad opportunities to go for, and I think it really hurt them. But, for Cloud9, this is a really nice win. Obviously, getting back to 500 is huge for this team, but 500 is not the goal. Hopefully, whatever they did during the break, whatever mental, gymnastics they had to do during the break to get themselves back on track, they were able to do, because this team should be the #1 in the league, and beating the #1 team is certainly a good sign for them. Hopefully the rest of the year is a little bit better for them, and not so much what we saw out of them at the end of weeks 3 and 4. And then moving on to our third game of day #1, and it's another intriguing matchup. Two teams that are right around that top, 3, 4, 5 standing. Team Liquid taking on Energy, and Energy picks up a super important victory. This team had been on a pretty big losing spell going into the break. I think they had lost their last 4 games in a row or something like that. Maybe it was 5 games in a row. It was somewhere around there. This team went from being, in a really good spot, being pretty clearly a top 2 team in the league alongside FlyQuest in terms of performance, to being, the 4th or the 5th best team in the league, and under 500 going into the break. Kind of similar to Cloud9, but I was more concerned about Energy's drop, because I just don't think they have the same kind of mechanical upside where C9 can just kind of get themselves out of problems by outplaying their opponents each individually in lane. Good to see Energy actually bounce back in this game, though. I do want to say shout out to the Reddit Analyst. When the LCS was bad and when the games were, they were fun last year, but when we weren't exactly doing super well and the teams weren't as competitive, the last 2020 or 2021, people didn't complain about draft nearly as much, and it was a nice, refreshing, like, little spring for me. It was like an oasis in the desert for me as a content creator, not seeing people consistently complain about draft in the LCS like they do in all the other regions that I cover. It was actually nice covering the LCS because the community felt a little bit more, I don't know, a little bit less like that. I don't even know how else to say. A little bit less like that. But here we are with this draft being the only thing that people talk about and none of the actual gameplay and the horrible decisions surrounding how Team Liquid got to this part of the game. Do I think the draft is great? No, I probably wouldn't draft this myself, but there are win conditions on this team. Pretending like this is an unwinnable draft in the LCS is ridiculous, in my opinion. But that's just my little aside. Shout out Reddit. As soon as our team started getting good, all of a sudden the armchair drafters come out and say that every single Team Liquid spawn should be fired into oblivion for drafting this. It is what it is. That's how Reddit is going to be, but, this is fine. This is generally fine. You can win with this draft, and they almost did win with this draft, even with the circumstances of how poorly they played, and so we'll go ahead and talk about it. Let's start with Energy, of course, because we start with the winning side. Player of the game, no doubt, is going to go to Huhi in the support position. He's been more up and down this split than you would have expected with him reuniting with FBI, coming off of probably the best year of his entire career with Golden Guardians. He's been more, I guess, kind of just good rather than great this year, which is definitely a bit less than what you were expecting, but this bot lane was superb in this game, and they're the reason they ended up winning. Huhi obviously being a little bit more direct for that. There's a play that's pretty famous where the Poppy, the Seraphine, and the Rel all try their best to kill the Nautilus, and they're just not able to do it. They spend 45 seconds trying to do it, and they're just not able to do it. It ends up losing Team Liquid the game. It's a really, really bad play, but credit to Huhi. He was so tanky on the Nautilus. His engages were also really good. It's not just the fact that he was a stat stick for this team. He was genuinely very valuable for them outside of that as well, but hopefully he can keep that up. I still think FBI's been really good for this team. FBI, I think, is another player who might be on like my all disrespected team, all underrated team, whatever you want to say. I feel like in terms of proportion to what he has been for this team and for 100 Thieves and for Golden Guardians and for Evil Geniuses or whatever team he's played for over the years versus the perception of him as a player, it's not accurate, right? Like, people look at him like he's Yan. He's significantly better than Yan, and this was another example as to why the Senna was very valuable here, and honestly did so much in the late game fights. So credit to FBI and Huhi, definitely the strength. I thought Doklo was pretty okay this game. Wasn't great in lane, but was really important out of lane, which I think is definitely more important in terms of top laners. And then Contracts and Palafox were also, fine in this game, but really it was the bot lane, in my opinion, that stood out for Energy in a positive way. And for Team Liquid on the other side, they just made some boneheaded macro decisions that ended up losing this for them. In my opinion, you don't necessarily have no options down the stretch here. I know you don't love getting to late game just as a team. Like, it's not really something that they have done a whole ton. Yan and Core love to win in lane, even if APA is a bit more of a scaler. Umti's definitely somebody who prefers to play a lot more fast and aggressive, but this team has played really slow this year, and so I think it's just the style they want to go for, and you get to that spot where the Seraphine is starting to get into a place where the Azir is very difficult to kill, and Cassante is going to be a really big problem because Impact played well on the top side. The problem is you're just taking a lot of really bad fights, you're engaging on low priority targets, and you're spending a lot of resources trying to get picks in situations that you just don't need to get picks in. Again, I think 5v5, there actually is an opportunity for Team Liquid to win some of these fights. It's going to be difficult to take down the tankier members of Team Liquid, especially if you get a really good core JJ engage. It's actually pretty difficult for Energy to deal with that because of their lack of mobility outside of Ahri ults and Aatrox dash, right? They really don't have a lot of tools to be able to escape a really well-timed combo coming in from TL. They just played it really bad, in my opinion, and honestly, I've been very disappointed by this team. They've stayed in the top 5 because the bottom 3 feel kind of like their own separate world, but to me, it's pretty clear Team Liquid are the worst of the competent teams near the top of the standings, and they're at 5-5 now, 500. I think their record is a bit inflated because of how bad some of the teams around them have been, just in terms of form. I think they've capitalized pretty well on teams that aren't playing in the best of states, but I think they're naturally going to come crashing back down. I wouldn't expect this team to get better as the year goes on unless they make some sort of structural change. This team wants to be very slow. They want to be very passive, and that's just not going to work in the modern game, and I think we're continuing to see it here. And then for Energy, this team is still okay. It doesn't completely erase my thoughts on what happened the past couple of weeks because Team Liquid's not exactly on a hot streak as of right now, but at least being able to beat them, maybe, 2 weeks ago, Energy would not have been able to beat Team Liquid. So it is good to see them at least have a positive performance here. I just want to see them get a bit more consistent. I know that's asking for a lot from Energy, who's really never been consistent. These players have never really been consistent. They've just had really high peaks, but I would love to see them, actually play out the rest of this regular season in a pretty strong manner. And then moving on to our fourth and final game of the first day, the first half of action here in the LCS in week number 5. And it was an interesting matchup between Dignitas and 100 Thieves, two pretty aggressive teams going head to head. And we got an aggressive game that 100 Thieves was able to come out on top in the most fun team to watch in the league. And I don't even think that's really all that debatable. 100 Thieves are the most interesting team the LCS has. We can talk about Cloud9 and FlyQuest and Energy kind of being near the top of the standings in terms of maybe expectation and roster construction, but 100 Thieves as a group of players is so fun to watch. I think the way they play the game is very, very fan-friendly, for lack of a better term. It is just it's pleasing. It's very aesthetically pleasing. Dignitas is also a pretty aggressive team in terms of how they play the game, and so this was actually a pretty intriguing matchup, but 100 Thieves is just a better version of what Dignitas offers, and so they were able to come out on top in this one. Player of the game is once again going to go to Quid. He has really unlocked himself. I was really low on Quid, not only last year where everybody was because he wasn't very good, but I was low on him, coming into the summer split. I did not think he was going to be a particularly effective signing for 100 Thieves because I think that, situationally it was just very weird what he had in the Challengers League. He was on a very prestigious organization in Gen G, and they didn't really have a lot of academy or challenger talent, I should say, in the Challengers League, and so he was this mid laner that was very resource heavy, and he was somebody that was given every ounce of resource that team had, and yeah, he was able to make a lot of advantage of that even when the team wasn't particularly good, but, was he going to get the same kind of resources here in the LCS? In year 1, the answer to that was no. When you play with Double Lift, especially, you're not really going to be getting a lot of resources as the mid laner. You can't really be somebody that needs a lot of help from the jungler in order to make things work because the jungler is going to be bot side. That's just generally how those things go, but reworking this roster, bringing in a really strong weak side bot, which I did not think this team would have, and then also Sniper, who's just very good isolated in a 1v1, actually allows you to play towards Quid a lot more, and I think has unlocked him individually as a player. His sway was awesome. I think his confidence is super up. He's the leading candidate for MVP right now in the LCS. I just don't really see how it could be anybody else. He really has been fantastic, but bot lane has been very impressive for me, and honestly, I feel really bad because Ayla deserves player of the game for how he played on Tom in this one. I think a lot of people are going to point out that final engage where he had the crocodile in his mouth and was able to get him right, and it was a fantastic play by Ayla, really what you should be using Tahm Kench ult for. But no, that's not really what I'm going to point out. I'm going to point out everything else that he did this game in terms of laning, in terms of some of the mid-game skirmishes, allowing opportunities for the Hui to actually be a lot more aggressive in terms of the positioning because of what Ayla was able to do. This just was generally a phenomenal game from the 100 Thieves support. And again, it's really nice to see him continue to play at a high level. I think this bot lane's been very good. Meech is somebody who was more of a strong side AD carry at the lower level. He was somebody who didn't really receive, a lot of weak side kind of, play Senna, don't worry about it, we're going to play for mid, kind of. That's not really how Meech ever played at the tier 2 level, but it's really nice to see him come up and actually be that secondary carry and not really need a ton of resources. He's actually been very good on the Senna, and it's really the champion that this team has prioritized a lot over the course of this year. Sniper and River continue to be great, especially River, who's just everywhere he needs to be at the exact right time, but Quid and Ayla were definitely the stars here, and I'm very impressed with what Meech has been able to do. And then for Dig on the other side of this matchup, again, this is an aggressive and, kind of up their team, and so when you draft the Lee Sin alongside the Smolder, it's definitely a little bit of a contradicting style thing, and I don't think it necessarily worked out all that much. XU's going to get dud of the game here. It's going to happen every once in a while. You're not going to be perfect on the Lee Sin, but it felt like his engages could have been a lot more crisp. He could have been a lot more active, and it just wasn't there. River actually held a lot of control and really was allowing, specifically Ayla to be super aggressive in terms of how he played the map, and nobody else on Dig really matched that. There have been a couple of disappointments in terms of how some of these players have played this year. year for me. Rich is probably the main one who was amazing in his first year in the LCS last year for Dig, dragging that team across the finish line into the playoffs, into a top 6 spot at the end of summer, but he's really not been that guy this year so far. I know top lane's gotten better in the LCS, and it's very clear that top lane has gotten better, but Rich, I think, has definitely taken more of a step back. This is a lot more of what we saw from him in the LPL and the LCK rather than, kind of what he was in the LCS last year, but XU definitely needs to get a bit more consistent, needs to know how to play matchups from a losing angle, and it just didn't happen here. Dove was getting caught out in a bunch of circumstances that he didn't need to be, but generally, I don't actually think Dignitas played this game all that bad. I think they were just outskilled and outplay-styled by 100 Thieves, and you can live with that because you are a bottom 3 team. I still think it's reasonable to think that Dignitas is the best of the, bottom 3, Dig, Immortals, and Shopify. I think it's fair to say that Dig is still the best team out of those, but, that doesn't mean they've guaranteed themselves a playoff spot. Like we said, them and Shopify have the same record now, especially after this loss, and so, you're going to need to keep your foot on the gas. But for 100 Thieves, 7-3, great start. It's not going to get easier in day 2 here, but, this is a legit team. We've said it for a while. This is a top 3-ish team in the league. They come in at number 3 in my power rankings coming into this week. Quid is legit, front runner for MVP right now. I think Meech and Ayla are playing great. River has obviously been well touted for how good he's been, and Sniper has also been very well documented for how good he has been. This team is just clicking. Their playstyle is fun. They're the antithesis of what we were kind of talking about with Team Liquid. This team gels well together as a team. They know their playstyle, but in a good way, and I think they're really capitalizing and making the most of their players. And then moving on now to day number 2, and we kick day 2 off with a matchup between Energy and Immortals, where Energy is going to be able to pick up the 46-minute win. This took a little bit longer than maybe it should have. Immortals was definitely delaying the game, not necessarily keeping it close, but rather just making it so Energy had a lot more trouble ending, and, it made Energy have to, I guess, make some plays towards the back half of this. I don't actually think Immortals macro was the worst of all time in this game, but Energy made those plays that Immortals essentially forced them to make to be able to end the game, and then they ended the game. So credit to Energy, they did what they were supposed to do in this one. I thought they played okay. You still want to see them play a bit more aggressive, a bit more, dominant, but this was a game where they 50-50'd a lot of things, and they knew that they were the better team, and they knew that they could get away with a lot more maybe against Immortals, but I also don't want to see them take those risks. I know that Energy fans have been complaining that this team has gotten too consistent, that the problem is that they are not taking enough 50-50s, they're not playing this crazy style that they used to play, but I don't know, man, this isn't particularly good League of Legends. I just, I would like to see them be a little bit smarter about the decisions that they make, but they were able to get them across anyways. Player of the game is going to go to Contracts, although you really want to give this one to Dokla in the top lane, who did pick Vayne top. You're not reading that wrong. That's not a graphic mistake. Vayne top in this one as the counter to Renekton, and man, did it work. First of all, laning phase was a disaster for Castle. There really was nothing that he was going to be able to do. He fell super far behind on the Renekton. Giant top gap in this one. But Dokla was also very relevant in these fights, mostly because Mask actually was really good in a lot of these fights down the stretch of the game on the Azir, and he got some super crucial condemns into the wall onto the Azir, and it was very difficult for Mask to actually be able to play the game at, going against this Vayne, who was playing super aggro. So credit to Dokla, but Contracts simply has to be player of the game because of just the sheer amount that he gained for this team with Baron steals and objective flips and, just generally playing Poppy at a super high level. We talk about it all the time, but like Poppy, Sejuani, these are the Contracts champions as far as I'm concerned. I know people look at him. Ivern is in that list as well, but I know a lot of people look at him as more of an aggressive player because he does play this devil may care style, but he plays them on more facilitative champions. I think that that's what makes it so interesting to try and define what Contracts is, but the Poppy this game was really good. I think Vayne obviously complemented it well. The Taliyah and the Varus are solid, very consistent carries, especially because you can move the Taliyah basically anywhere you need her to be. And if you want to get that Vayne ahead, you have more options, I think, with the Taliyah there. But Huki with another good game on the Nautilus. This was more of a team effort, I would say, from Energy in terms of the fighting, but obviously credit to Contracts for actually being able to secure a lot of the objectives that did end up winning this team the game. But, Immortals stayed in this long past, I think, what they should have. Credit to Mask in particular, who I think had a really good game on the Azir. His scoreline doesn't necessarily indicate that he was involved in everything that this team did, but I actually thought he played super well. I think the mechanics were definitely there. This is one of the more complete games that he's had in a while. I really liked his laning phase as well. Tactical and Ole were fine. I think if there is real criticism, it's the top side of the map. Just as there were positives for Energy, there are negatives for Immortals. Dead of the game is going to go to Castle for me. There was a big top gap in this one, and as much as I'd like to say it's because of the Vayne, I do think that obviously the pick helped. The Renekton was useless, and Castle did nothing in this game, and that was a big problem. A lot of people are going to want me to give this to Armeo, but he wasn't nearly as bad as people on Reddit like to make you believe. He made some pretty critical errors, and he lost the Smite fight, but again, it's hard for me to blame junglers on 50-50s. Like, I don't know if that's a weird take, but when junglers lose 50-50s, that's kind of on the team. Like, it really is more on the team's ability to, and, you know, obviously the jungler is a part of this as well, but on the team as a five's ability to control that objective. If you're letting somebody in and creating a 50-50 opportunity, then it's never really in their favor. So, you know, as much as I like to diss Armeo for giving that up, and he didn't play the fights well, I thought his mid game was actually pretty good in this one, or at least better than it had been in recent weeks. I think Castle was the bigger issue in my opinion when it came to this team, but Immortals' issues are the unit. It's the 5-man unit for Immortals that continues to struggle. They just don't really have anything that they do at a good level, right? They are just kind of below average at everything in comparison to the rest of the teams in the league, and what they really do lack is somebody on the team that's just going to win them the game. You were really hoping that that was going to be one of your imports. It's not been. Mask was good in this game, but, you know, if he was going to be like a Quid caliber carry, you know, in terms of what he has offered this year, then perhaps they could win this. Castle got destroyed in the top lane. Tactical has really never been that guy. Even at his best, he does need a lot of help in order to get to the spots in the game, in the late game where he's able to take over. And Kalista is certainly not the champion that's going to be doing it against this team comp, and so you're really just kind of hoping and praying that this game ends if you're Immortals and that things go right, but Energy's more talented, so even if this game went long, even if there were moments where you had opportunities, you never really were going to be able to capitalize on them because this team is just not built for that. This is a bottom tier team, and I think we're really starting to figure that out. And then for Energy, again, it's a good week. It's not a great week, though. You really would have hoped that, you know, if we were to walk out of this week saying, oh, Energy snapped this 4-game loss streak with 2 wins coming out of the break in week number 5, then it's like, oh, they're back on track. They looked really good. They looked good. They just didn't look great this week, and I think that is at least a bit concerning. Is this a title contender? I don't know. Like, I had them at number 4 in my power rankings, and honestly, they haven't really done a whole ton to change my mind on that, especially with how well the top 3 teams are playing at the current moment, so we'll have to see how the rest of this week goes, but I guess 2 wins are still pretty positive for Energy overall. And then moving on to our second game of day number 2, and it is a battle for first place, a 7-3 matchup between FlyQuest and 100 Thieves that FlyQuest is going to be able to take. They're going to take full control of that number 1 spot once again. They're going to avenge that loss after losing on day number 1 to Cloud9 in not very clean fashion. They looked a lot better here on day 2 against a team that I think they should be beating in relatively clean fashion. I love 100 Thieves. They play with an intensity that I wish every team played with, but FlyQuest is just more talented than they are, and so to come out and just beat them, I think it's encouraging for 100 Thieves. Obviously, you would have loved to take first place by yourself this year because, you know, you're already so far ahead of schedule in terms of how the rebuild is going, but this isn't a particularly big upset. I would have liked perhaps maybe putting Quid on something that could be a bit more explosive other than the Karma. I know that champion's ridiculously broken right now, and I still think that she is the strongest mid laner in the game, but Quid is just not the kind of, I guess 100 Thieves is not the kind of team that wants to be able to play through the Karma in the mid lane. They want to be able to play through something that you can prioritize a bit heavier, and we'll talk about that when we get there. But for FlyQuest, player of the game for me is once again going to go to Jensen. He's gotten a lot of these this year. Got his first dead of the game earlier this week. Got his, you know, I think 3rd or something player of the game in this one here on the Orianna. And it really is a difference when you see Jensen actually get to play the things that he's good at versus being asked to play meta. Like, obviously, the guy can play Azir, he can play Karma, he can play Talia, he can play those champions at a high level. We know he's a good player, but it's different when he gets Orianna, or when he gets Zillion, or when he gets Anivia, or the champions that he's a little bit more well known for. It's really fun to watch, and the Ori game was really awesome for him here. He was able to take over in terms of damage. Those shockwaves were always huge. Ori, when she gets snowballing, is a very difficult champion to stop, especially when being piloted by somebody who is so good at her like Jensen is, and so Really good, nice bounce back game from him. You really wanted to see him play better than he did on day number 1, and that's exactly what he did here. Blippo was also amazing. He's probably been the best player on FlyQuest this year, which I think is definitely surprising for me. You know, Inspired and Jensen are definitely up there for me. All of them are in conversation for being like first team All-Pro. I think that that's pretty fair to say, but Blippo to me has been the most impactful player on FlyQuest, and Sniper's been good. I think he's maybe been a bit overhyped in terms of the performances he's put out, not because he's been bad by any means. I actually think he's done really well to, you know, be a strong laning presence, but I just don't think he's had the same kind of game impact as somebody like Blippo across this split up until this point. I don't think he's been a star up in the top lane. I think he's just been a good player. Obviously, I think he can grow into a star, and he's already further along than I expected him to be, but Blippo abused him in this game. That Olaf into Renekton matchup was not in Renekton's favor. We'll get more into it when we get to Sniper, but Blippo continues to look amazing. Really, the only time he has faltered this year has been games where he obviously has been a little bit disconnected mentally. Maybe the Shopify game is one that you can point to, and then also obviously Cloud9, who is just a very good team as we saw here. So Jensen, Blippo looking great. Masu and Busiel looked good. Busiel looked much better on the Ashe in this game than he did in the first game of the week. Inspired has also been phenomenal. I think almost underratedly great. We expected him, you know, to come in and be dominant. He was a jungler who's never really done anything other than dominate at this level, and even at the LEC level, he's just been very good. I was not surprised when he came in and was one of the best junglers again. I had him number 2 in terms of my preseason jungle rankings, above players like River and above players, you know, like Contracts, who I think people thought really highly of, and I think Inspired has lived up to that for sure. FlyQuest is just a good team. They deserve first place by themselves, even if they're not, you know, guaranteed to be there after losing to Cloud9 earlier this week. And then for 100 Thieves, you know, you would have loved for them to win this, because that would really, you know, skyrocket them, put them on a really big crash course to being one of the better teams in the league. But I don't think they're quite there yet. I think that there were definitely positives here. I see, and I do want to, again, complain about this because, you know, I was loving life. I loved covering the LCS for so long on this channel. You know, we've done coverage of all of these leagues for so many years, but the LCS has been the longest on this channel because I live in North America and because it's the home region, so I cover it. But I always liked covering the LCS the most because it felt like the fan base was the least complainy when it came to like Reddit or Twitter. It was the least like backseat gamer-y of all of the major regions. The LEC was bad. The LPL's always been the worst, and the LCK is trying to in a bad direction. But I feel like the LCS community has been more backseat gamer-y, more draft Reddit armchair and analyst than they've ever been this split. And maybe it's because the teams are good again. I don't really know, but every single post-match thread is now just talking about draft. And, you know, I've said it once on this channel, I'll say it 1,000 times. Draft matters, but like gameplay matters so much more than draft does. And we've seen it example over example over example across the years. If you don't watch my other region analysis, I say this very commonly on this channel, but draft to me equates for about 20 to 25% of your game. And that's a, you know, a pretty decent portion, but gameplay and the decisions you make in the game is 75 to 80% of that. And so, you know, in comparison, it doesn't necessarily feel as important. And I think for all the people complaining the 100 Thieves draft has no engage, well, yeah, they have no engage when the Renekton's super far behind and when the Trundle can't get in. But when you have, if you had a strong Renekton that you could play through, which was the, you know, desire, the game plan for 100 Thieves in the early game, to supplement a Trundle and a Nautilus in the bot lane with a Kai'Sa, you have options with this draft. It just didn't end up working out like that because you lost the early game. I get it. Like, I get why people want to complain because they want something tangible to grasp onto that they can just say, this is the problem, and this is, you know, we can tangibly talk about this. We can equate our knowledge to this because theoretically there is no barrier between, you know, a Reddit armchair analyst talking about draft and coaches talking about draft. But I think context matters a lot for draft. And as much as I would have loved to see Quid on a carry, and as much as I would have loved to see more engage for this team, I don't think this draft is unwinnable by any means. And I think very easily, if this game goes the other way, if 100 Thieves are just able to snowball the Renekton, if the Kai'Sa gets a lot of kills, and if the game ends early because Karma's just not, you know, she's enabling the Kai'Sa and the Renekton and the Trundle to be unkillable, and we're looking at FlyQuest comp of Olaf, Orianna, Ezreal, Ashe, and we're like no damage. The same thing we said about whatever it was, Team Liquid earlier this week, or whoever, you know, was being complained about that. Like, that's what would have happened if 100 Thieves would have won this game. And so it's just such a fickle concept, in my opinion. It's something that I really want to push back on this channel. I think 100 Thieves just played bad. I honestly honestly think they just got outskilled in this game. I think that is the easiest way I can equate it. Was their draft perfect? No, but FlyQuest draft wasn't perfect. I certainly don't think they had some sort of massive advantage in this game, maybe outside of the Olaf counter pick in the top lane, but Sniper just could not survive. He's going to get dead of the game. This was the biggest time where he's just felt outclassed. This was his like welcome to the league rookie moment where he was just not good enough. He kept dying over and over again, and Bwipo was the one capitalizing on that. Yes, Inspired spent time trying to make sure that that was a bit more of a priority for him, but Sniper definitely was going to be the priority for 100 Thieves in the early game, and they just weren't able to get that through. Meech had gold in this game, but it never really mattered. The Kaisa could never get in. You know, the Trundle was useless, and Quid couldn't really do anything to change the game on the Karma. They got outplayed. It's fine. You know, FlyQuest is a good team, but I'm just tired of... I'm frustrated that the community that was so good about this for so long, that was so good about not complaining about draft, has now just become the community that, in my opinion, right now is complaining the most about draft of any of the major regions. So, 100 Thieves lost this game of their own accord, and FlyQuest won this game of their own accord. Jensen was great, Bwipo was great, and that's going to get you a win. This team continues to look amazing, even though they lost to Cloud9. I still have a lot of faith in them. I take it more as Cloud9 being good than FlyQuest being bad. I still trust this team a lot, and this was a solid win. And then moving on to our third game of day number 2, a battle of two teams really kind of fighting it out for that number 6 playoff spot. At 4 and 6, it's Dignitas taking on Shopify Rebellion, and Dignitas is going to pick up the win, kind of solidifying their spot as the best of that bottom 3 at the moment, moving to 5 and 6. They're only one game below 500. It's really not all that bad for Dignitas right now, all things considered, but I just don't know how this team is going to hold up when they start playing teams that are a bit more competitive than maybe Shopify, who just has a lot of problems. They have a couple of players who are just not consistent at all. Even if their carry duo and their bot lane is playing pretty well at the moment, top side of the map was not very good in this series for Shopify, and it really opened up a lot of holes for Dignitas to be able to capitalize on. And, credit to their players. We've been critical of some underperformances this year, Rich included, and he stepped it up in this game. He's going to get player of the game on the Gnar. This felt a lot more like the Rich that we had known from last year. Not necessarily some lane giant, although he did dominate Fake God in lane in this one. Not necessarily the arc that Rich has been on over the course of his career, but he was very good in lane in this one, and it was really the team fighting that created so much space for the rest of this team to be able to operate, to make a lot of these fights a lot easier, and I think Rich did a really good job of that, so I want to give him a lot of credit for it. Hopefully this is him kind of getting back on track. I know Fake God has not particularly been very good this year, maybe the worst top laner in the LCS in terms of the performances that he's put out, which is very sad to say, but we will get to that in just a second. But I think Rich, at least being able to show that it's still in the tank, is definitely a positive, because he was so good last year. He was an All-Pro last year. I don't know if he actually got it from Broadcast, but I don't really care what Broadcast gave him. He deserved the All-Pro last year, and he was, kind of the core of what Dignitas was doing. It's nice to see him actually be able to generate his own lead and be able to do something with it, even if this team isn't necessarily going to prioritize him as a resource carry, nor should they in this draft, but just in terms of how they have played this year so far. I think Dig was solid, and Rich was a big part of that. I think Tomo was also very good. Isles was very solid on the Nautilus. Not was a really big pick across this entire week. Really interesting to see, but that champion looks like he's in full force again. The Enchanter meta seems to be coming to an end with Nautilus starting to take over once more, but, the Smolder ended up getting some kills. Dove was pretty good this week, I think, generally, even if Insanity was honestly a bit better on the other side of this map. I think Rich was definitely the difference maker, and it's nice to see that for a Dignitas win in particular. But for Shopify, I just want to make this comment, and if you guys are familiar, I don't know how many of you guys who watch the LCS watch my other regions. You can let me know down in the comments. I am kind of curious, but, I talk about this a lot in my LCK or my LPL ones, but I have these kind of like weekly rant sections in those videos where I, really get a little bit frustrated, like personally, at, the narratives that are being spread on Reddit. It's not as big of a deal for me when it comes to LCS and LEC, because I know that the vast majority of people who want to know about the LCS and the LEC just watch the games for the LCS and the LEC, whereas for the LCK and the LPL, a lot of people actually do get their opinions from Reddit because they don't want to stay up and watch the time zone, but sometimes I just have to complain, and I think this is the appropriate opportunity. We're 40 minutes into the video. If you're still here, you probably like the content, so I'm going to complain a bit about Reddit here. What happened to the LCS, post-match threads? They were so good last year, and they were really good in 2022 as well. It often was the most positive of all of the regions in terms of the post-match threads. I know I've talked about this on the channel before, but It honestly does kill a lot of the excitement to see the community just be so negative all the time this year. It really is frustrating, and I bring it up in this game because this game is like the epitome, the example for it, because neither of these teams are very like elite. Like obviously they're a part of the bottom three. It's not like there are two titans going head to head, but man, you just see so many negative and I want to say like brain dead takes in terms of how social media reacts to games like this, that it does kind of kill the excitement for the league in a lot of sense for me. Like I want to know how it feels for you guys, whether you let the noise like kind of seep in, but you know, as somebody who tries to take the temperature of everybody as a part of this channel, because I you know, if there are narratives, I kind of need to know about them if I'm going to talk about these games in that way. It can sometimes just drain years off of my life to read some of these takes. Like I get it, Fake God's been bad. He's probably been the worst top laner in the league. He's going to get done of the game in this one, but saying that, you know, he's a waste of an LCS spot, or that Shopify was stupid for bringing him up in the first place, that he was never going to be able to make it at this level. Like it's revisionist history. This guy was the best top laner in the NACL, and we've seen players who have been worse at that level make jumps that are even more significant. Fake God, for context, was 2 to 3 times the player that Sniper was last year. And obviously Sniper's doing better and he's on a better team and there's a lot going right and Fake God hasn't adapted, but to try and make this revisionist history that, oh, Shopify's a horrible and dumb org for putting Fake God on this team, it's such a negative and pointless take in my opinion. And I feel like the comments, like that's just an example, right? It's not the only one of these that I've seen, but I'm just curious to know if you guys are as perturbed by this as I am. Maybe I shouldn't be. Maybe I should have thicker skin when it comes to this, but I don't know. It shocks me because the LCS comments have been much better than other regions for so long that the fact that they are so much worse than the other regions in 2024 has come as a bit of a shock to me. But talking about what Shopify did in this game, Fake God was bad. You know, Jace got gapped, didn't know how to play it. It happens. He's not been particularly good. He's not been this horrid, unplayable player that everybody says he's been. In their 4 wins, he's been pretty solid, but when he loses hard, and that's more than a lot of other top laners. Boogie was also really bad in this game. Volley looked completely useless. The engages were not there. The damage was not there. That champion didn't do much, and that's sad because I think Insanity and B-Boy in particular played really well. B-Boy has been awesome for Shopify. I think he was a great pickup. Talk about Reddit being wrong, right? So many people just clamoring for Wild Turtle and being so pissed off that they would bring in some random import that's a failure from these other regions, having never watched the CBLOL, having never watched this guy play. You know, obviously he was great last year. He was really dominant in terms of the early game and his laning phase. He really showed a lot of mechanical promise, as I talked about in my primer, and that has shown up here. That the tape has matched that, and Insanity's been a lot better since he's moved on to these, you know, more mage-oriented champions. I think, you know, these are the things that we should be celebrating for Shopify, not just sitting here and vilifying Fake God for not being good enough and keeping Shopify out of the top 6, because it's not just his fault. Boogie had a bad game here too, and they picked Lucian Nami. Like, this is not a particularly good draft in my opinion. This draft is worse than the one people were complaining about last game for 100 Thieves by a wide margin in my opinion, and so I don't know, like there's just, the community is very much stressing me out, and I'm curious to know what you guys think of it. But nice game for Dig. It's a nice win. Again, it puts them in a pretty decent spot to be able to grab that 6th and final playoff spot. I really don't know where they're going to be sitting by the end of the year, because I don't think this team really has a ton of upside, but I said that about Dig last year, and they ended up getting top 6. They ended up winning a playoff series, and so potentially they could do that again, but I really don't think this is going to be one of those teams that contends for the top 5. And that's going to bring us to our final game of week number 5, our 8th game of the week. And it's another, you know, kind of important game because these two teams are at the same record, even if they're not at the same skill level. It's Team Liquid taking on Cloud9, and Cloud9 is going to be able to pick up the win. It's a 43-minute win, and something that we saw pretty consistently over the course of this week was games being slower, being a little bit more methodical, and not necessarily as high action paced as we kind of saw at the beginning of the season for a lot of LCS teams. I've been saying for a while that this meta has been significantly slower, specifically for North America, not just the LCS, but the NACL as well. It's certainly slower than it was last year, in my opinion. You have a lot more opportunities in the mid game to be able to drag things out, and losing teams aren't just going to capitulate nearly as easily. There aren't as many tools to just destroy the game unless you are like bodying the game, and so you have these games that are a little bit closer, and so it really does matter how you end up playing some of the back half of these games, and it's the little mistakes that are going to end up costing you if you're a team like Team Liquid. And it's kind of what's been their problem the entirety of this split, is they have good moments, but they also have a lot of bad moments. This team is just not complete in its way, and Cloud9 took advantage of that in this game. But once again, player of the game is going to go to Jojo Pune in the mid lane. We've kind of already talked about how Quid is like this big runaway favorite to win MVP. I think JoJo is really the only person to me that is pushing him for that. We'll see what happens. We get the final week, a super week coming up, and I think, you've got people like Whippo and Jensen that I think are on the outside that could potentially make their way into that conversation as well. But right now, for me, it's Quid versus JoJo, and it's really going to be all about that final week of the season, who can be a bigger deal to their team. But JoJo has really much reinserted himself into that conversation, in my opinion. An amazing Azir game here. He's just the focal point for Cloud9. He is this team in terms of how they want to play resource-wise, and I think that he honestly goes under the radar for how important he is for that. This was really the first game that this team has had where Berserker has felt very relevant, and Smolder will do that. That champion will be very relevant at 40 minutes into the game when we get to the team fighting stage, but JoJo was still kind of the one that got them there, and so you've got to give him credit for that. Blabber was good this game, and it really felt like those three, the trio of players that I gave an A+ in the preseason, they're going to be the ones that need to step up and come forward and be the stars on this team. I think JoJo has done his part. I think Blabber, to his credit, has also kind of done his part. He had a really rough stretch of games in the middle of the split that probably cost him like first team All-Pro, but he's still been very good. Like every single one of this team's wins are not through Blabber, but because of Blabber. When he plays well, they just win the game straight up. If he was more consistent this split, I think things would be going better, but Berserker finally having that big pop-off performance in the back half here on Smolder is good to see. I thought Vulcan was fine. People really criticize Fudge in this game, and that's because Impact got a lot of resources. Team Liquid had a very clear game plan in this one, which is draft Lee Sin and Talia and Senna and play around the Jax in the top lane, try to get him moving. So as much as I like to sit here and say that Fudge was miserable in this game, it really was kind of a difficult situation for him to end up playing out. I thought he was fine. He could have been better. I don't think he was phenomenal this week in general, but, being the worst player on your team and having this be the outcome of that, I think is fine in this game. Like, that's really not something that I'm particularly concerned about moving forward. If the middle of the map is going to play like this for Cloud9, they're going to be a contender, essentially no matter what. JoJo really has been that good. What an offseason pickup for this roster. He has come in and essentially reinvigorated the rest of this team. I think even if Blabber and Berserker aren't playing well, I have faith that Cloud9 can win games against good teams purely because of how well he is playing. It's definitely something that I think is pushing them forward in my eyes. And then for Liquid, like I said, this is just not a good team. They are inactive, they are passive, they don't really do anything, and even when they have good moments, like this is really the first game in a while where they came in with a game plan and with something that they wanted to do. Impact has been their best performing player of the split, and so they're like, okay, then let's go play for Impact. Let's put him on Jackson. Let's try to get him into the late game, try to get him into this team fighting, situation where he can dominate, and they put so many resources into it. It's just not enough. The rest of this team isn't good enough. APA is going to get dud of the game. He is not playing well this split. I do want to say this is a very weird dead of the game because it's not just, APA played bad, because I don't think that's a very fair blanket statement to make here. I just think he made a lot of mistakes in side lanes. His macro was really bad this game, and I think that he disrespected Cloud9 in a lot of different circumstances. He overestimated what Talia could do in side lanes to survive a lot of these weird, positioning errors that he was making. But when you just look at the team fighting that he had towards the back half of this game, he was really good in a lot of these team fights, and so it's very weird to kind of talk about him as the dud of the game because I actually thought he played a lot of the important team fights very well. It was just a lot of the peripherals around that ended up losing Team Liquid the game, which has got to be frustrating. APA just needs to clean it up. He is, in my opinion, regressed from last year. People were calling him the Ziggs one trick. It's the funny JoJo interview after this game, the Ziggs one trick, and I don't think he's a Ziggs one trick, but I certainly do think that he struggles to understand multiple different playstyles. He's more of a playstyle one trick, in my opinion. He's somebody who wants that range, who wants that stability, who wants that, more burst-oriented comfort. Ziggs, Aurelion Sol, like those kinds of champions. That's what APA is going to be more comfortable on. Talia asks you to have a completely different skill set from those champions, and I just don't think APA has that in its current state. I do think Jan and Core have actually been pretty good for this team. Jan is very inconsistent. He's a good laner, but he can't do much else outside of that, and so you're naturally just going to have these up and down games, and Senna makes it easier, but Core, I think, has actually been pretty solid this year. I'm just not a fan of Umti in the jungle. I think that he's really been the exact opposite of what they brought him in for, which is to be this early game playmaker. He's not been that for this team, but Team Liquid just doesn't excite me in any way. They are the worst of the best teams. I'll say it over and over again. This game absolutely did not change my mind in that regard, but for Cloud9, this is a nice win. They moved to 6-5. 5, they are above 500. Rejoice, Cloud9 fans. You are finally back above 500. I think it will last. It feels like they figured a lot of the stuff out. JoJo's just playing out of his mind right now. Do I think they're guaranteed to get number 1 like I thought at the beginning of the year? No, I think that they certainly have more problems than that. Teams like FlyQuest and 100 Thieves and Energy are going to be able to push them, but at least for now, it's really nice to see Cloud9 at least taking advantage of some of the good things that they're able to do. All right, but that is going to do it for my LCS Week 5 overview and analysis video here in the spring split. Up on the screen now, you're going to see the LCS standings after 5 weeks of action. You see one of these borders is highlighted a bit in green. That means that we actually have our first team to officially lock themselves in for the playoffs in the spring split here. We've got FlyQuest at number 1 being able to lock themselves in. Of course, top 6 end up making playoffs, so you just need to not be in the bottom 2. Good for Fly to guarantee themselves that. Of course, on the right, you can see a couple of things. First off, power ranking. That's where I personally power rank these teams from number 1 to number 8, and then change, how those have changed from last week in terms of LCS rankings to this week. Week 4 obviously being weeks ago, but last week in terms of week 4 to this week. So we can go over the risers and the fallers. Riser, new number 1. It's Cloud9. They beat FlyQuest, and honestly, they should be the best team in the LCS. Am I guaranteeing you that they are the best team in the LCS? No, I don't guarantee it. I don't guarantee that they're going to walk out of the LCS with a trophy. But to me, if you ask me right now to place a bet on a team, that if I had to place a bet on a team that was the best in the LCS, I think it's Cloud9, and I think they'll be able to get the job done, even though they've been inconsistent. This was a good week for them, and FlyQuest is going to fall to 2 because of it, but right now, it does feel more like a top 2 and then a 3 and 4 that I think are more connected. 100 Thieves is going to stay at 3. I considered moving Energy up after the really good week, the 2-0 week, but honestly, I wasn't super impressed with the way they got that 2-0, and so I'm going to keep them at number 4 for now. Team Liquid going to stay at 5, still the worst of the best, the upper tier teams, but still better than the bottom tier teams in my opinion. Dig kind of solidifying their spot at 6 in my opinion. And then Shopify is going to jump up to 7 with Immortals falling to 8. It's just that Immortals is clearly the worst team in the LCS at the current moment. And even if I don't think Shopify is great, like you have players that are playing well. Insanity, B-Boy, I think they've really stepped up. In particular, those two were really good this week, but Immortals just doesn't really have anything going for them right now. They don't have any players that are playing well. They don't have any players that seem to have upside to be playing better. Hopefully Castle and Mask can be that, but I just don't trust this team to be anything other than 8th. Their 4 loss streak, I think, is indicative of that. But let me know if you agree or disagree with my power rankings. Who am I too high on? Who am I too low on? Down in the comment section below. I hope you guys comment on that rant I went on as well, and just let me know what you guys think of it in general, whether that fits the LCS vibe or not. But it's time to move on to my player of the week and my dud of the week here in week number 5, and this one was pretty easy for me on both sides. Player of the week is going to go to Jojo Pune, the mid laner for Cloud9. I didn't have to think about this. This was really not all that up for debate in my eyes. Jojo was a very easy decision to pick for player of the week. He was amazing in both of their games, and I think without him, Cloud9 is going to struggle a lot more. I think his addition actually completely unlocks a team that would generally be fine, but I don't know if they would be elite without him. He really has been the best player on the team, and he's the only one pushing Quid for MVP in my opinion. And then runners up for this week in particular, Huhi for Energy. Energy did get that 2-0, and Huhi looked good in both games on Nautilus. It's what you want to see. You want to see him be more aggressive. You want to see him be unkillable, be that, initiator that he was last year for Golden Guardians. And then I'm also going to give it to Insanity, who I thought was really good in both of the games that he played, even if Shopify wasn't able to get the 2-0 this week. But dud of the week for me in week 5 was also really easy. This one's going to go to Armeo. He's just not been good. He's got the most dud of the games of anybody in the LCS so far in 2024. And I think it's mostly because of the style. I think it feels like he doesn't mesh well with the rest of Immortals. I think he is a decent player, as we saw for a lot of last year. I just don't think that the way he is playing right now is particularly good. He's having a lot of lapses in judgment. It doesn't feel like the communication on that team is good at all. I don't really know what the problem is in terms of communication, but it doesn't feel like there is any. And Armeo was supposed to be kind of a specialist in that, and so whatever's going on for Immortals, it's just not working. They feel like the worst team in the league by a pretty large margin, and he's a pretty big part of that. So he's going to get dud of the week here in week 5, and Jojo is going to get player of the week in week 5. But let me know what you guys think of that down in the comment section below. Of course, if you did enjoy the video, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit subscribe. We don't only post about the LCS, we post about the NACL as well, Tier 2, here in North America, as well as the other 3 major regions in the LEC, LCK, and LPL every single week on this channel. So if you want a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL esports, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But of course, With all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.